Before we start, I just feel like I have to apologize to you both and our listeners.
For what?
What, for the movie?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yes, it was awful.
Welcome to Screens of the Stone Age, the podcast where scientists review movies about prehistoric people. My name is Josh Lindell. I'm a grad student studying Neanderthal teeth, and I'm here with...
I'm Dr. Kimberly Plomp. I'm a bioarchaeologist. I study the human skeleton, health and disease, and evolution.
And I'm Dr. Russ Barnett, ancient DNA specialist interested in evolution of felids and ice age extinctions.
And today we are reviewing Mistress of the Apes from 1979. This is an audio podcast, but let the records show that Ross and Kim are both shaking their heads on our Discord video call.
And we need to put a content warning on this because there was 3 rapes and 1 interspecies lovemaking.
Yes. We'll let this be the content warning. Normally I'll put the content warning up before the intro music, but yes, content warning. Moving forward, I might put a content warning at the front anyway to give a timestamp if it's depending on what we have to say about it. But yes, there are several sexual assaults in this movie.
Mm-hmm.
So, who wants to summarize this movie for us?
I can bite that bullet. I don't think Kim's very keen. Understandably so. Okay, so this film is so 70s that it definitely had a cocaine budget that was higher than its special effects budget.
Yes.
I'm fairly certain. So we start off with an operating theater. We have a woman being operated on. We have doctors and nurses and surgeons. And then we cut to 3 very creepy looking guys who are clearly up to no good because they're smoking in a hospital. And they're kind of sneaking through the hospital corridors. And then one of them basically kind of assaults and threatens the sort of receptionist nurse, asks where the heavy powder is, which I'm sure everyone in the 70s knew what they were talking about, but I'm guessing that is just the good stuff that they keep on in the pharmacy and in the hospital. And so while they're doing this, they're kind of sneaking through trying to find the drugs. They cut the power. Obviously, this has an effect on the operations that are going on. Somebody calls the police, who turn up in the hospital with their kind of guns drawn. The woman that was being operated on kind of falls off the table, which is not really a standard surgical procedure, I think. The creepy guys end up in the operating theater. They're fighting with the surgeon. The cops that turn up get shot by the guy who previously only had a flick knife, but somehow he's got a gun now. And so all the cops get shot. And yeah, it's just a bit of a kind of narrative mess. We don't have no idea what's going on. But then we kind of cut to the woman who was being operated on in recovery. She is called Susan. We discover that she lost her baby while they were operating on her. Why they were operating, that's never explained. But she is an anthropologist, married to a sort of scientist, anthropologist who works in the Congo. They're employed by a guy called David Thurston, who is like a magazine publisher, who's a very kind of creepy and just not very nice dude. We kind of discover that Susan's husband is called Earl. He's in Bukavu in the Congo. He's gone missing. They found his camera, which has some crappy shots of what they describe as ape men. Australia Pliocene, I think is what he calls them initially, which is quite funny. And then they decide that they're Homo habilis based on these random photos. We see also, to get some background on David Thurston, the kind of publishing magnate. He's a real creep. He does some Austin Powers style modeling shoots with the model, which are really, really cringe. And he's kind of just sort of leching over her and kind of pressurizing her into I don't know, whatever. Very, very 70s. Although there's some exposition that he's married, but his wife just spent his money, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, so they meet up at Thurston's house, Susan, and I think there's another guy there as well whose name I didn't quite get. Is he called Corey?
Yeah.
He is Paul Corey.
Paul Corey, yes. He is... What is he? He's like a adventurer, gentleman explorer, colonial kind of stooge. I don't know. But they kind of discuss what's going on with Susan's husband, and then they decide that it's settled. We're going to find the missing link. And then Susan says, I'm going to find my husband. But it's like the most emotionless statement. I mean, the acting in this is so crappy. It's just so crappy that, this is like, 2 years after Star Wars. This is, post Jaws, like you'd expect better, I think. But it's just really shoddy and cheap. Okay, so now we kind of cut to the deepest Congo, which is clearly Malibu in California. There's nothing that even suggests rainforest, let alone Central African rainforest. We discover a bit more about Thurston, apart from being kind of a lechy creep. He had Earl, Susan's husband, killed deliberately for reasons that aren't made entirely clear, but maybe just so that he could lech onto Susan a bit more.
Yeah, it seems like that.
I think that's what it is. And then they decide to go into the forest. So there's Susan, there's Thurston, there's his wife, Laura, who's taken along for reasons that make no sense.
For reasons.
Yeah, there's Paul Corey, the kind of pith-helmeted explorer. And then they've got 3 sort of local guides that are, for some reason, I think all women. Well, we know the reason. It's because this is like a 70s exploitation flick. It's so that they can get semi-naked and titillate the audience.
But they say it's because...
Pun intended.
Because the Bantu maidens are virgins and sacred, so no one's going to hurt them. So it's safer for them to go instead of the men. That's what they say. Yeah,
that makes a lot of sense. Not.
They also say that it looks like women's lib hasn't penetrated Central Africa when they decide upon taking those Bantu women guides.
Yeah,
it's barely penetrated this film, I think.
Yeah.
Anyway, so they go into the forest, i.e. the kind of Malibu scrub, and we think we found out earlier on that Thurston's magazine is a shooting magazine. Like he's obsessed with guns, and he's brought along his favorite new gun, which he just decides to shoot randomly in the forest. Again, for reasons, just because he's a weirdo. But they're being followed by some stooges. So the people that were originally kind of tasked with killing Susan's husband, they kind of hang around the sort of staging post and have been instructed to follow the group as well, just to hang around. I don't know. We see that there are, in fact, as well as the stooges that are kind of following them, there are ape men watching these Homo habilis, or the Australia Pliocines, as they called earlier. And then we kind of cut to them having made camp. We've got Susan in her tent. She's clearly burned her bra in this sort of some kind of women's lib movement, because she likes to wear very little in the tent. And Thurston kind of just brazenly walks in and starts pawing at her, which is really creepy. He tries to kind of suggest she has a nightcap, but we kind of learn that he's sort of sleazed onto her before in the past. But she reminds him that she's here to find her husband, although at no point does she sound like she gives 2 shits about him.
Yeah.
But she manages to rebuff him, which is great, and so he gets booted out. And then Susan takes the booze that Thurston's left behind and goes and visit Paul. Says, "Would he like a nightcap?" And so I wasn't quite sure what was going on here. Was she putting the moves on Paul, or was she just trying to find somebody who wasn't a complete sleaze to spend some time with?
My take on that was that she was looking for somewhere safe. but she didn't do up her shirt still. Like, her shirt was still open. So I don't know. She could have been seducing him.
Yeah. Or maybe there's just like a button drought in the Congo. Nobody can get any buttons because it's a recurring theme. So the next day they're off into the jungle again to search for her husband and these half-ape people, and they find some stone tools. And then there's a little bit of exposition which I couldn't follow. It just made no sense. Something about how these stone tools have been tossed, not thrown. This tells us everything we need to know.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
What?
I don't know.
What is going on? But we catch some more glimpses of the ape men watching her from the bushes. A spear gets thrown at their tent. They go to investigate. The ape men are kind of walking along, and Thurston, with his fancy gun, shoots one of them, who happens to be a female. And then they kind of just ignore that. They've just shot a living Homo habilis, and they just ignore that. They don't really care. Go and investigate further. But then they get distracted by finding a leopard in a snare, which is clearly made out of, stuffing and fur. That's quite funny. And this is a leopard that's been caught by those poachers / stooges, the ones that killed Susan's husband. And there's a bit of a confrontation because Susan, being such a humanitarian, she's totally ignored the Homo habilis that's been shot, but cuts down the ferocious leopard that's kind of hanging from a tree. Whatever.
While they're shooting at her, like a bullet hits the tree, and she keeps cutting it down.
That's how
the poachers are shooting at her.
That's how serious she is about wildlife. And then there's like a bit of a confrontation with the poachers. They discuss how what they're looking for is bigger than King Tut, the Dead Sea Scrolls, and Peking Man together, which is, I guess, true. Then we cut to, it's now nighttime. One of the porters is bathing in the nude, and some crocodiles come and try and eat her. But then she gets attacked by someone. We think it's a Homo habilis, and she is killed dead. And then when they find her the next morning, it's like, this axe tells us everything we need to know. These are people, and they've killed us. They've killed her in a kind of eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth fashion.
Because we killed a female, so they killed a female.
Yeah, that's what we're meant to kind of surmise from this.
Again, they don't care very much. They just walk away.
No. These people are the biggest assholes.
Yeah.
And then we get some more gratuitous nudity. So the poachers are spying on Thurston's wife, who's called Laura. And then Thurston encourages them to attack her, which is really... it's really kind of, even for a film like this, it's really just not nice at all. It's just really sleazy. It was horrible.
Yeah.
And so they do attack her, and he's kind of laughing the whole time
as she gets raped.
Yeah, I mean that's definitely the implication. Mm-hmm. We don't see anything, but that's definitely what's implied, and that's gross. Then we cut back to Susan in the jungle. She spots the Homo habilis. They seem to be taking part in some kind of burial ceremony. So suggesting that they have culture and some kind of religious structure in their lives. Her and Paul now come back after they've observed the 8 people to come back to the camp. But there's now a trap laying in wait for them with the sort of poachers and Thurston. And Laura tries to warn them, but they kind of essentially assault her and try and shut her up. And Paul gets knocked out. And I think Susan runs away back into the jungle where she hears a baby and then kind of finds it in a kind of really well made crib hanging from a tree branch. And I think this kind of really sleazy 70s exploitation film, it tries to have, I think, ideas above its station. So it's trying to say something about how Susan has lost her baby in this traumatic way in the hospital. And this baby, which is never explained, and we never see it again after this point in the film. It's supposed to be some kind of surrogate to, inverted commas, heal her from her trauma or something. But she picks this baby up and breastfeeds it, and then we never see it again.
She's a stranger. Like, she's lucky they didn't kill her. Like, most mothers would have gone and just killed this strange animal that's come up now and picked up my baby.
Yeah,
that's how you die. Yeah. That's how
the mother's dead. They killed the only female Homo habilis that existed, which is why they let her do it, because they were stupid men who didn't know how to take care of the baby, and that's why they need her.
I assume that there was more than one.
We don't see any more.
That's it.
Why do you need more than one, right?
And then, so we then cut back to Paul and Laura, who've now been staked out on the ground in the merciless Malibu sunshine. They're just there, kind of doing nothing. We get treated to a really, really crappy song called Ape Lady, I think.
Which I wish I wrote down the lyrics to these songs.
Which it comes out of nowhere and is just so shite.
It also comes immediately after that horrible rape scene.
Yeah,
and
when they're kind of,
it's a major shift in tone.
Totally,
it was so weird.
And when it sort of tried to be a bit serious and a bit kind of issues led with the whole kind of breastfeeding baby thing. Anyway, so it reverts to kind of like just innuendo and kind of balladry with this Ape Lady song, while Susan's trying to kind of I guess be an anthropologist, a really crappy anthropologist to these Homo habilis, which she seems to think the best thing would be to do some really suggestive banana eating in front of them, which is just
it was really, so weird.
Just so weird. And then so this is her being an anthropologist with these Homo habilis, and we cut back to Elizabeth and Paul. Elizabeth asks repeatedly to be untied to use the bathroom, which happens. You know why they don't. What these are kind of hardened killers, but they don't want her to be uncomfortable while she's staked out, so they let her go to the bathroom. And then
without supervision, they just let her go.
No supervision, yeah. Giving her plenty time to pick up the knife, which is just lying there unguarded. And
she's like, I have to go to the bathroom again. And he's like, okay, here you go. And like, what, you've been just letting her go unsupervised to the bathroom while she's been tied up? This doesn't make any sense.
No. But she's too, I mean, it's implied that she's too stupid to realize that this is an escape opportunity. So Paul tells her, why don't you just grab the knife? Because he'll be too busy watching me, which he does. And then I think it's also implied that he's going back to while she's kind of supposedly going to the bathroom. That this poacher is going to attack her again, but she stabs him good and kills him. So that's great. And then she comes back and unties Paul, and they escape into the jungle. And then we sort of see some more scenes of Susan sort of befriending the Homo habilis. They hunt a rabbit. I'm not sure what species it is, but it doesn't look like it's an African species. And it looks also as well like they're actually kind of beating it to death with these rubber hammers. It's a real lagomorph that they're going after.
They're standing in a circle with hammers, basically playing whack-a-mole as this rabbit is running around between them, and they're trying to hunt it with hammers. It's a very funny scene. Apart from the fact that maybe it's a real rabbit that they're really smashing with hammers.
I don't know if we learned any time before this, but the two poachers are called Brady and Sykes. Sykes was the one that was killed, and Brady's burying him under a cairn to protect him from hyenas, and he's very sad that his friend, his only friend, is dead. Paul and Laura, after they've escaped from the camp, they meet up with Susan, and she tells them that in the 2 days she's been with the Homo habilis, she's worked out that their alphabet has 8 letters, and that they trust her. Okay. She wants more time, because it's so important that she learns all about the Homo habilis. And so Paul and Laura, who I think have just met her like a week before, say that that's fine. We'll get you some more time. We'll just kind of harass Brady and Thurston, the bad guys that are left,
with like harmless pranks.
Yeah, they start a prank war
instead of just murdering them or something.
Exactly. Yeah, they start a prank war. Remember, this is the husband and the rapist of this woman.
Yeah.
And their idea of kind of giving Susan time is to throw some firecrackers onto their campfire so that it sounds like bullets. And
put
to put
snakes
a snake
in a can.
In their coffee can. I mean, that's... It's crazy. We have a random guerrilla attack as well from a guy in a suit that's just like with the kind of contrast levels of the film way down. So you can't... Well, you can really tell it's a guy in a suit, but it's a guy in a suit in the dark, so it doesn't look so bad. And then we just have... It's like towards the end of the film now, and it just gets a bit kind of weird. So you have the Homo habilis are living with Susan. She's kind of seducing one of them, I think.
Yes.
Again, with the kind of lack of buttons in the jungle, she kind of lies down and encourages one of them to lie down with her. I think he's very gentle. I think he's a considerate lover.
Yes.
And it's certainly much better than Thurston. But yeah, what I noticed here, which was quite weird, was that while they're having a very kind of cringy love scene, she's still wearing her wedding ring from her murdered husband, who never gets talked about after, like that Homo habilis baby. He just disappears from the plot entirely.
Yep.
And then the kind of final bits are Thurston manages to trap and shoot one of the Homo habilis. Susan protects the ones that are still there. They trap Thurston and Brady using bolas and their hammers and all their other kind of habilis equipment.
And a snare trap.
And then while Thurston is sort of hanging upside down from the snare that they've laid, the Homo habilis are kind of playing with the gun and accidentally, deliberately shoot Thurston dead. So now the only people that are left are Susan, Laura, and Paul. And Paul is just, even for the 70s, this is weird and kind of just not quite, not right. But he kind of, I didn't look this up, but I'm fairly confident in my assertion that this is just absolute nonsense made up. He says to Susan, Koko Banga Saka, which means in their made up language, may you have 1,000 summers.
I tried to look it up, but I feel kind of icky Googling Koko Banga Saka alone, let alone the fact that I didn't find anything, so I don't know how to Google this. I mean, they say it's in Bantu, but Bantu is like 400 languages, so I don't even know how we would like Google Translate that.
No. And so Susan decides that she wants to stay with the Homo habilis. She tells Laura that essentially she's having a baby with them. Laura's kind of concerned about how that will go, but she says it's fine. She doesn't want any contact. And so they're like, okay. And then they just leave. And so that's Susan, Mistress of the Apes, having a baby with the Homo habilis that she mated with, and Paul and Laura, I guess, go back to civilization and try to prove the
second custom theme song.
Yeah, which is called, I think, Mistress of the Apes. All I can see is a life of therapy and PTSD from what they've experienced in this jungle. But that's it. And so it's a very crappy film, even for the 70s. I think it has like 3.5 out of 10 on
which is still
IMDb.
Too much.
Yeah.
It's
None of
pretty
the
high
characters
for some of the things we've watched.
Yeah.
None
of the characters are likable or make sense. The story is sort of nonsensical. It kind of veers wildly in tone between serious and nonsensical, and it has some very bad music as well.
Yep.
But it does have a lot of 70s nudity.
Yeah.
So it's got that going for it.
It's not one of the reasons why I chose it when I looked at the cover, but I thought it would be fun nudity.
It's not fun nudity.
No, it very much makes light of rape and domestic abuse because that was her husband, which I didn't even pick up on. I didn't know that was her husband.
And kind of colonial attitudes to African people as well.
Yep.
It's a wrong-un, essentially.
Mm-hmm. Well, do we want to start by addressing the direct references to Homo habilis and other hominin species? And
Australia Pliocene?
No, Australia Pliocene.
I think it was Australia Pithecine, which is not quite so bad. I'll give you the full exchange here. When they're looking at the slideshow of the photos from her dead husband's camera, she says, the forehead, the jaw, that's Pithecine. And then Paul Corey replies, Australia Pithecine to be exact, but it's not the Africano or the Boise, it's somewhere in between.
But that doesn't make sense. Somewhere in between, and and then for it to be Homo habilis doesn't sit in between Paranthropus and Africanus. It overlaps with Paranthropus boisei, but
Okay, so Pithecine means ape-like, right? So what they're saying is, she says it looks ape-like, even though it just looks human. We could talk about the prosthetics. They're just like buff, muscly muscle models or something. But they have a little bit of prosthetics on their face to give them like the smallest little bit of a snout and sort of a flatter nose, basically.
Mm.
And they could have been a decent Homo erectus, but they definitely are not Homo habilis.
Mm-hmm. They could be Homo erectus. If they were Homo erectus, I would be fine with that.
Yeah.
The Australopithecines are Australopithecines, the genus Australopithecus, which is pre-human, so they would be bipedal apes, essentially. They'd be something similar in size to a chimpanzee, but they would walk on 2 feet.
Yeah, if we saw it, we would think it was a chimpanzee, or we would think it was an ape. We wouldn't think it was a human. I suspect it would be the same with Homo habilis. Homo habilis didn't have much larger of a brain size than a chimpanzee, and it wasn't much taller either. It was only like 3-4 feet tall. It wasn't very tall. It was, there's a lot of people that argue that Homo habilis should actually be Australopithecus.
Yeah. So, it wouldn't be so bad to suggest that if it was really Homo habilis, that it is somewhere in between Australopithecus and Homo, because that's basically what Homo habilis is. If that's what they were getting at, then we could give them that interpretation and it's fine. Except that they say it's not the Africano or the Boise, it's somewhere in between. And so Africano is Australopithecus africanus, and Boise is Australopithecus boisei or Paranthropus boisei. To say it's in between those two is not correct, because it's maybe in between Australopithecus africanus and Homo erectus, which is probably not too inaccurate to describe Homo habilis.
Yeah, but it still wouldn't look like that.
Yeah. Later on, they do suggest that they say Homo habilis, the missing link between Australopithecus africanus and modern man. And that's when Susan's talking. It does seem like Susan knows how to pronounce all the terminology correctly, but it didn't seem like Paul Corey knew how to pronounce any of these words correctly.
Mm-hmm.
I suspect that he was supposed to be an anthropologist as well, like her husband's colleague.
Yeah.
So he should have been the one pronouncing it properly.
Do we have any other actual science to go over? They really prominently present us with Homo habilis throughout the whole movie, but we could talk about the tools that they use.
Yeah, so
Homo habilis is the handyman. They talk about that in the show.
So he's the handyman because they found stone tools at around the same time, like 3.3 million years ago, which is around the same time that Homo habilis starts to appear. So they called it the Homo. That's why Homo habilis is in the Homo. Is called Homo, is because of the assumption that they made the tools, but there was other hominins around also that could have made the tools. So we don't actually know who made the tools. But the first stone tool that they toss at them, not throw, that looks decent. That could somewhat be. It looks a little bit Acheulean, but it could be Oldowan. Just a basic.
Just a rock, essentially.
Yeah, just a rock with a tiny bit of modification, like a bit of modification, but not really worked on. But they wouldn't have had spears. There's no evidence that they would have had projectiles.
Or hafted hammers, which is sort of the main weapon that they keep using. I don't know if they're meant to be hammers or axes, but there is a scene when two of the Homo habilis fight against each other very comically, sort of this turn-based style where they take turns clubbing each other in the pecs with their big hammers.
Yeah. And I couldn't figure out that in that scene when the two are fighting, was either of them the one that had just slept with Susan? Or
yeah, I think it was the one that got beat up that had come out, right?
Yeah,
okay.
I think so, but it's so hard to tell because they all look exactly the same.
Yeah.
And
why were they fighting? Was one of them jealous, or?
Or he got in trouble for sleeping with either the one female or female of a different species. I don't know. It didn't make sense. There was no explanation, and then it never happened. Like, if her lover is the one that did get killed, she didn't show any kind of remorse or anything either, right? Like, she was like, bring in the next one. I don't know. It was weird. The other thing that was completely nonsensical too is that any hominin, including modern humans, if we don't have a gun, we're not going to win against a gorilla in hand-to-hand combat. You're just not going to win.
Yeah.
Well, there's actually a hint to the behavior of Homo habilis here that sort of ties everything together, but also kind of contradicts everything in the whole movie. So, Ross, you didn't mention that right at the opening of the movie, we start on a quote superimposed over a skull, and it says, "The skulls taken from Old Duvai Gorge tell us we are all the children of Cain, all of us," and it's attributed to African Genesis. African Genesis is a book I've never heard of. Are either of you familiar with this book?
No.
Okay, so I looked up African Genesis, and I'm surprised I didn't know about this book because it seems like it was pretty influential in the 70s. But it's a book written by Robert Ardrey, a nonfiction book subtitled "A Personal Investigation into the Animal Origins and Nature of Man." And it was written in 1961, and it seems that it sort of arose from a kind of collaboration with Raymond Dart, who is most famous for discovering the first Australopithecus africanus, or for naming Australopithecus africanus, based on the Tong fossil in South Africa. And so apparently in the 1960s, Raymond Dart was working on this hypothesis that Australopithecus africanus was some sort of aggressive hunter that was like using clubs and clubbing animals based on evidence he thought he found in other fossils associated with Australopithecus africanus that showed evidence of being clubbed with bone clubs somehow. And so he put together this hypothesis of Australopithecus being aggressive, animalistic, very territorial, very violent. And then Robert Ardrey sort of translated this into a more popular story or a more popular narrative in this book, African Genesis. And so it was this whole hypothesis that the origins of humans were violent and aggressive and territorial, and that therefore our violent, aggressive, territorial tendencies come from this deep evolutionary history going back to Australopithecus, which didn't align with any ideas people had at the time and also doesn't align with our ideas of Australopithecus right now. But it seems like it was pretty influential at the time. And so when you look at the movie through this lens, the myths about Homo habilis amongst the local people are that they're aggressive and territorial and that they won't go near them. And then that sort of plays out in the way that they're sort of following them and attacking them. But then also everything that Susan says as she's studying them sort of contradicts this. It's as if we're supposed to expect that they're aggressive and territorial, but then as she studies them, she realizes they're actually very human and they have very human emotions, and then she demonstrates that. So I think the movie is actually based on a little more than it sort of looks like it is at first glance, except that the ideas it's based on are very out of date and sort of a little bit beyond us culturally at this point.
Yeah. So just to go back to that, the evidence of being hit by clubs, I think later was more interpreted as evidence of being falling out of trees because their carcasses were brought up trees because they were the prey of leopards. So they weren't the hunter, they were the prey. But this idea that it just goes back to that demonic ape that we talked about last week too, right? That demonic ape hypothesis that aggression is innate in us.
Yeah, and when was the demonic ape hypothesis?
I think it was
a little
70s
later
or
than the
80s.
1960s. It was the 1990s, apparently.
Was it?
1996 is when the book by Richard Wrangham and Dale Peterson came out, Demonic Males, which seems a little late for that hypothesis, but whatever. The other side of this African Genesis, despite the fact that we don't think about Australopithecus and human origins as being sort of based in violence today, is that at the time, at least according to the Wikipedia article surrounding the book here, this is before the Out of Africa hypothesis, which really became prominent in the 1990s. And so at the time, people were leaning towards more human origins being in Asia. And so the book placing human origins in Africa was a little bit profound at the time and turned out to be true. And the other thing is that at the time, in sort of evolutionary psychology, apparently they were thinking of human behavior as like fundamentally different from animal behavior. And so the book, even though it was wrong about violence, was still sort of prescient in thinking about human behavior in terms of just another form of animal behavior, which is the way I teach it in my intro classes today. And I have a question on my test, which about half my class always gets wrong, because there's this idea that everybody sort of has in our heads that we're, as humans, fundamentally different from animals. And so I ask this true or false question. I say human behavior is fundamentally different from animal behavior because we operate on reason and logic, and they operate on instinct and emotion. And I'm always surprised, because I emphasize this in my class so much, that human behavior is just exactly, it fits perfectly in with the range of primate behavior, and we can understand ourselves just in terms of, a normal range of animal behavior. And yet it's really hard for people to get this idea out of their head that, like, everything we do is based on reason and logic, whereas when you really start studying human behavior, most of what we're doing is just a different form of primate behavior that has parallels in gorillas and chimpanzees and other primates.
Yep.
Yeah.
And a lot of that comes from because we don't necessarily self-reflect on where it's coming from. We, we take an instinctual activity or feeling, and then you put a social explanation on it.
Yeah, if there's one thing that humans are great at, it's justifying their own actions.
Yep, and their own special greatness. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I thought it was interesting. I didn't talk about that quote at the beginning because I didn't know anything about the book that it came from. But it's interesting that they also use kind of biblical language in it. Talk about being the children of Cain, because this is something that historically has been used a lot essentially as a slur against non-European peoples, is that in the Bible, the children of Cain are cursed, and certainly that's been used to justify all sorts of abuses of different human groups. And I think it's until recently it was part of Mormon doctrine that certain human groups were children of Cain, but white Europeans definitely weren't.
Is that not still part of Mormon belief?
Quite possibly. I'm not fully up to date on Mormonism.
The Lamanites.
I don't want to get sued by the Church of Latter-day Saints either. So I'll just.
I bet they could only help our ratings. The Graham Hancock stuff only helps our ratings.
Yeah, I don't want to be aggressively pursued by angry Mormons.
It'd be so scary.
Angry Mormons just
banned from Utah.
Dang it, you guys, I'm very upset about the things you've said. Maybe you can help me understand the geography here, because they describe their location as being both Kenya and the Congo.
Yeah.
And I am not very great with my African geography, but I don't think that there's overlap in those
they don't share a border.
Is there?
No, they landed in Nairobi.
Yeah.
And then they drove somewhere, and then they were all sent into the Congo. So I don't know if they're just calling just the jungle the Congo, but they're either still in Kenya. Yeah. I don't know. But there's a country in between. Which country is it?
But also in 1979, the country that is today called I always mix up my Congos. The Democratic Republic of Congo was Zaire in 1979, right?
Possibly. I also do not know my Congos.
There are two countries called Congo. One is called the Democratic Republic of Congo, and the other is called the Republic of Congo, and they border each other. Yeah.
So, Democratic Republic of Congo is Zaire, which does not share a border with Kenya. There's Tanzania and Uganda in the way.
Yep, and Rwanda and Burundi.
Yeah. And I don't think the Congo River passes through Kenya either, so that can't be the explanation.
No, I don't think so.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure the Great Rift is sort of a continental divide, because the Congo River basin flows west
into the Atlantic. Yeah.
Yeah. And they also, she has, she makes her tape recorder voice memos for herself as she's studying them. And her first one says, the time is 700 hours, the 14th of May, some 13 miles north of the Nairobi River, Equatorial Africa, Congo province. But the Nairobi River is in Kenya, and it flows east to the Indian Ocean, so there really can't be overlap between the Congo River Basin and the Nairobi River Basin because they're flowing in opposite directions. And like the borders and the names change in Africa over the past 50 years. So
but the geography doesn't.
I don't think that there's a Congo province in Kenya.
No.
Like I
You have to remember
just don't
that
think that's ever existed.
As Canadians, this is, I'm sure, uneducated Canadians, this is not a problem that you guys have. But have you ever seen those kind of vox pops on the streets where they ask typically United States people to point out not just a country, but any country on the map? They show them a map, and it's like, can you name any country on this map? And they go, invariably, if they say they know, they say Africa as their country of choice. And then the guy goes, no, that's a continent. And then they kind of flustered and they can't point to a single country. So I think possibly expecting the audience of this film to be confused by the fact that Kenya and the Democratic Republic of the Congo do not share a border was, they didn't go broke by underestimating the stupidity of their audience, that's for sure.
Our Canadian culture, especially of the 90s, was really based on making fun of Americans. Kim, do you remember Rick Mercer's Talking to Americans?
Yes, so good.
It was exactly that. It was a Canadian comedian. They did this show called This Hour Has 22 Minutes, which was a satirical news show like The Daily Show, right?
Mm-hmm.
And this guy, Rick Mercer, would go to the United States and do this man on the street talking to Americans, but he's doing it as like a straight Canadian reporter, telling them about fake news events that are happening in Canada and getting them to give him sound bites about them misunderstanding Canada. Stuff like that. Our Parliament building was an igloo, and that because of climate change, it was starting to melt. So they were doing some initiative to refrigerate the Parliament building and stuff like that.
There was one, I think, where he was saying that there were too many moose in Vancouver, like moose were taking over Vancouver, and whether they agreed or not that we should chase them away by throwing Timbits at them. And people were like, yeah, I mean, that sounds like the way to do it. Something like that.
Timbits are donut holes, Ross. You've probably been to a Tim Hortons in your life.
I don't know. I didn't know what a Timbit was, but today's been an education, so that's good.
I've been thinking about talking to Americans a lot, considering the political situation in Canada right now.
Yeah, it's not very funny anymore.
No, sadly.
One of the things that you'll read about this film online when you're reading about it, as you do, about half of the sources are going to tell you it was filmed on location in Kenya, and about half of the sources are going to tell you it was filmed in Malibu State Park, which it obviously was.
Yeah.
And the confusion comes from the last line in the credits, which says, "The producers wish to express their thanks for the invaluable advice and assistance given by the personnel of Kenya Film Commission, Nyoike Njoroge, Director, Masai Mara Game Reserve, Kubifora Settlements, and the Nairobi Museum of Natural History." And I am sure that this is 100% bullshit. Do you think that they consulted with any of these people or places?
But why would they even? Like, what would they talk to Kubifora about? Maybe
they got the pronunciation of Australopithecine.
Or maybe they wanted to know what sounds a leopard makes when it's in a snare.
Yeah.
Or what sound a gorilla makes, maybe. I'm pretty sure that they used an elephant for the gorilla sound effect.
Oh, dear. Yeah, I know that these guys did not have the budget to go to Kenya, that's for sure.
No.
We can talk about the language, because she spends some time. I mean, she basically spends the whole time learning their language. And I've written all of the voice memos that she says here. She says, other than the fact that the habilis walks upright, he has many of the behavioral gestures similar to the largest of the greatest apes, such as the lowland gorilla of Western Africa.
So I'm gonna fuck him.
She refers to them as the greatest apes, which I thought was little bit funny instead of just the great apes. Not just the great apes, but the greatest
apes.
That's like one better, isn't it?
Yeah. She says, his language, though crude, is far more extensive than the primates of the Virunga Mountains. I guess she's referring to just gorillas there, but she didn't want to say gorillas twice in succession in the script.
I think you get chimps in Virunga as well, don't you?
I guess so. That could be the case. Although she's calling them primates. I mean, it's only the greatest apes that live in the Virunga Mountains that have the language. We'll talk about whether or not they have language. His language, though crude, is far more extensive than the primates of the Virunga Mountains. I must learn that language, but before I do, I must make him come to me. And she says it like that.
And she does.
And that's when she starts eating the banana, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yep. I cannot go to him. Take note, I will start by mimicking. I must become, in fact, Homo habilis myself. So she's doing a participant observation there, which is pretty nice.
The banana trick works every time.
Yeah, that's standard ethnography. That's what I learned in my ethnography course. And then later when she meets up with Paul and Laura, she says, I've been learning a language that's chiefly composed of grunts and belches. As nearly as I can tell, there's 8 letters in the alphabet. And this is something that I find everybody does in our culture, which is to conflate language with
the alphabet,
with written language, with an alphabet, which is pretty funny because our written language only goes back about 5,000 years, but language probably goes back several 100,000 at least. But certainly they don't have an alphabet, and certainly they don't have 8 letters in their alphabet, because a letter in an alphabet is not the same as a phoneme, which I think is what she means.
Yeah.
Which is a small piece of sound that signifies a meaning. Which languages can be phonemic, but they don't have to be. So, I don't know what you call English, but English isn't completely phonemic because, our alphabet letters signify a sound, but they don't consistently signify the same sound. Whereas other languages like Serbian, which I've been slowly learning over the past 15 years, is truly phonemic. So every letter in the Serbian language corresponds to exactly one sound.
Yeah.
Which is really helpful for learning and also just fun because you never have to ask how something's spelled. If you can hear the word, you know how to spell it, which is pretty cool.
Same with Spanish. All the letters in Spanish are always pronounced exactly the same.
But you can have other written languages that are not phonemic at all, like Chinese, which is it called logographic, where every word has its own symbol that is not based on the way it sounds, but it's based on its meaning.
Or pictographic, maybe.
Yeah. And I guess we can talk about the fact that she suggests that his language is more extensive than the language of the gorillas, which of course don't have a language, because a language isn't just a system of vocalizations, because prairie dogs have a complex system of vocalizations, but it's not a true language unless it has grammar. So no animal has been able to demonstrate a grasp of language in the way that human language is.
Not even like Coco with her use of sign language. The thing about chimps and gorillas that have been taught sign language is they never fully grasp the grammar. So they can connect a meaning to a word, but they can't grasp the grammar of it. And the grammar is... You can't make a sentence.
Yeah, the grammar is what allows language to be as extensive as it is, because you can take a finite number of symbols and you can turn it into an infinite number of meanings. And you can talk about events displaced in time and space, which you really need the grammar to do. And the most gracious interpretations of the chimpanzee and gorilla language suggest that they can do creative stuff with it, but when you really look at what they're interpreting, you could interpret it in a much more simplistic way. There's a famous story, I can't remember which chimpanzee it was, but it was a story about how it used the words that it had available to make up a new word, and it was looking at a duck, and it didn't have a word for duck. It didn't know the word for duck in sign language yet, but it described it as a water bird. And so they're like, oh, it's putting words together to create a new word. But the duck was swimming in the water at the time, and so maybe it was just saying water and bird, and it was pointing out two separate things at the same time rather than constructing it. And that's the main thing when chimps use language in gorillas. Realistically, what they're doing is they're connecting a concept to a word, and then just sort of throwing them out randomly rather than constructing a grammatical sentence. So like if a chimpanzee wanted, I can't remember the exact examples or the exact chimps or gorillas, but like if they wanted like food, if they, let's use the stereotype of a banana, they'd be like, cocoa, want, banana, banana, cocoa, want, banana, want, cocoa, banana, banana, want, cocoa, banana, banana, want. You know, like they're not constructing a real sentence. They're communicating, but they're not using language in the way that a human would use language, right?
And also in the film as well, despite all of her babbling about how complex the language these Homo habilis use is, we don't actually see them speak. We see them howl, and that's it.
Well, the language is chiefly composed of grunts and belches, so that's the extent of it. But it's more complex than gorilla communication.
That's true of Glaswegian as well, but I mean...
Yeah, it was an awful movie. I would say to our listeners not to watch it.
Yeah.
Do we have, you know what? The last thing I want to say, I know that there was no budget for this movie, but do you think that it was sponsored by Remington Rifles?
Yeah. Yeah.
Quite possibly. They do talk a lot about Remington Rifles.
When they first show up at Thurston's house after he tells the secretary to go get dressed, he stands up and picks up his gun, and when they walk into the living room, he's holding his gun, and he is like, what do you think about my new Remington 308 rifle? And then later when he fires a warning shot at the poachers, you know, he's acting because he's on their side, right? But he fires a warning shot at them, and then he yells out to them, I've got my Remington 308 trained on you, so you know that next time I'm not going to miss.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's almost a bit Wayne's World, isn't it?
Somebody was making money from something. Yeah.
I never go hunting Homo habilis without my trusty Remington 308.
Well, do we have anything else to say about this movie?
No.
Should have never been made.
Yeah. And it was the last, I think, I remember reading on IMDb, it was the last film that one of the actresses made. I can't remember which one, but one of them.
Yeah, it would be mine too.
Acted anything after this one. Presumably because after hitting that height, she couldn't go any higher.
Yeah, the actress was the one who played Laura, Barbara Lee.
Okay.
And it seems like she'd had some troubles leading up to this because she was supposed to play, I can't remember, I think it was Vampirella or somebody like that for a Hammer movie. And like they'd filmed it and they were like recutting it and they kept postponing it. And she was getting frustrated that they kept putting it off because it was supposed to be a big break for her. And then eventually they canceled it and it never came out. And that sort of put her over the edge. And then when she was filming this movie, they basically like ADR'd the whole movie as they did in the 70s. Like they re-recorded all the sound, and they were like fucking with the schedule for re-recording the sound on this one, and she was getting frustrated with them, and she was, you know, she had bought tickets to go visit her husband in Spain because he was filming a movie there. And they're like, okay, we got you set up in the studio for this date. And she's like, but I already got my tickets for Spain. And so she's like, fuck it, get someone else to record it, I'm going to Spain. And so basically, I believe all of her dialogue in this movie is someone else's voice because she had skipped. And then, yeah, she never did another film after this. So I think she was pretty frustrated with the way she was treated in the film industry leading up to this movie.
Yeah, not surprised.
Plus, her character was just like repeatedly victimized, and she at no point got very much like justice, right? I guess they killed them in the end, but it wasn't her that did it.
Yeah.
I don't know.
She did stab Sykes, though. That was nice.
Yeah.
But there was no reason for her to be in the movie other than to be a victim because, as we established right early on in the movie, before we even met her, she and her husband weren't on good terms. They weren't getting along. And why would she come on this trip with him when she doesn't have a role in this mission, right? It didn't make any sense.
Yeah.
No. But one other comment I had a note on is that so they bury Sykes under a mound of stones to stop the hyenas from getting him. But if they're actually in the Congo rainforest, as they're supposed to be, that is not hyena territory.
No.
Hyenas will dig up graves to get to bodies. That's why quite often cemeteries in hyena territories are sort of cement lined or kind of rock cairns. But yeah, hyenas don't live in the rainforest, just like lions.
Good.
Yeah, I was thinking he'd have to have buried him pretty deep for the hyenas not to smell him and dig him up. So, in the end, not a recommendation. Don't watch this movie. Are we saying that?
Yeah, it was sickening. There was absolutely nothing entertaining about it.
Yeah, it's not so bad it's good. It's pretty bad. No. You know what? The crazy thing are the songs, though. Yeah. They're, if you can find these songs and just listen to these songs, you know what? You might need the context, because we go from this really uncomfortable rape scene, which they cut away. There's nothing graphic about it, but
it was very
heavily implied. Yeah. But we cut from that straight to Susan suggestively eating a banana while this sort of like funky poppy Tom Jones sings about her. The lyrics in the second song are like, ape mother, ape lover, she went from New York to have sex with the apes or something like that. Yeah. It's like,
I mean, I think there was a lot of drugs involved with this production.
A lot of heavy powder.
Yeah. The 70s.
I also don't know why her baby had to die in order for her to, like, she could have just gone to find her husband without having her baby die.
No, Aurora pointed this out to me. Her baby had to die so that she could breastfeed the Homo habilis baby.
That never gets referred to after that point.
Yes, never comes back.
Yeah. Well, this is episode 99, by the way, which means our next episode is episode 100.
Ooh.
We've watched so many bad movies.
We have. I've been putting together sort of a variety show for episode 100, which I'll let you two come into cold.
Okay.
And I'll show up with a plan next time, and we'll go through everything.
Okay.
So we'll have that to look forward to in the next episode.
Great. Sounds mysterious, and certainly can't be any worse than what we've watched today.
If you've been enjoying Screens of the Stone Age, get in touch with us. Follow us on Twitter at SOTSA_podcast and on Facebook at SOTSA podcast, or send us an email to screensofthestoneage@gmail.com. Screens of the Stone Age is supported by the Paleoanthropological Society of Canada. Find out more at pasc-scpa.ca.